Awesome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for this. Well, it should have been the third event, second event in this Encode graph series. Today we'll talk about the data economy, which hopefully will fill you with ideas and cool things. This is part of our overall Encode graph programming, educating you about everything to do with the graph across the next effectively 4, 5, 6 weeks. And hopefully after that, we'll have some more programming around hacking and more learning. In general, for those who didn't join our first event, oh my God, what's going on there? First event, purpose of Encode is to help you learn crypto with our education community. We do a number of events, workshops, hackathons, accelerators, coding boot camps, all to teach you about all things blockchain and specific protocols. And so thanks for joining, and recognize a number of familiar faces. So that is very good to see. Do join our Discord. I'm just dropped a message into chat with that, but that is the place to stay up to date with everything we do and also engage with the community and speak to everyone, and in general also speak to our team as well. This series isn't an 8-event series. It is all online, all live on Zoom every week. We do now switch into every Thursdays, I think pretty much now, and it's really a good first step for you if you're looking to learn about the graph and get involved in the graph ecosystem. And this event, for instance, is completely non-technical, and the events in general are designed for both a technical and a non-technical audience. So an overview of, why is that? That is my mouse being weird, clearly. There we go. An overview. So we had the Intro to Graph event, which I'm just going to drop, or has already dropped the link to before. Unfortunately, we should have had, you can see I copy and paste this table because that today and tomorrow is wrong. Tomorrow we should have the Taking Client AMA. Unfortunately, that had to be cancelled. Next Tuesday, we have subgraphs. So we're going to go into more of a technical thing. On the 18th, curating and delegating on the graph. Thursday, the 25th, has to get involved with the graph. Oh, no, this is so strange. And Graph on Avalanche on Thursday the 2nd, and Thursday the 9th, a little showcase of cool stuff using the graph. Awesome. So let's keep letting people in and broadly get started. So we dealt with this earlier. This is actually the only graph specific slide really in this whole presentation, but just say it out loud to kind of to give you a little bit of, if you weren't here on Monday, a little overview. So the graph, our wonderful sponsor to this program, is a decentralized protocol, and the whole point of it is indexing and querying data from blockchains. Specifically, we're trying to get data out of blockchains for use in blockchains. And this is any event data related to a smart contract or anything that's happening on chain. And the reason why this is important is if you're going to build decentralized applications that use data in some way, that data has to come from a decentralized source. So you can't just scrape it and put it in. You have to use something where you're sure that there is no central point of failure, which is where the graph comes in. And so this event today is about this thing called the data economy. And we're going to try and break down what data economy means and explore a few concepts over the next kind of 30, 40 minutes or so. As I say, if you have any questions, please put them into chat and I'll be more than happy to answer them. So let's start definitionally. So when we talk about data economy, I think you broadly mean one of two things. Either we mean a global economy built on some different model of data ownership, or we mean an economy where you can trade data, or the economy that is a subset of data. Whereas in the first case, we're saying, okay, what if you rebuilt the economy around a different sense of data? And what do we actually mean by data in this context? So broadly, I'm going to define it as wide as possible. It's any event associated with identity, in my identity. So specifically, I'm talking about a person's data. Clearly, there's aggregate data and there is data relating to groups, but in this context, I'm just going to do it through the individual, and you'll kind of see why later. But probably we talk about any event, anything related to me. And one thing I'll talk about later is within this context, it's very clear that we emit data, like just by being, we emit a ton of data that we can't keep track of. And maybe crypto offers a different way of looking at this, for instance. So let's start off with the global economy built on a different model of data ownership and explore that a little bit. And for starters, we want to look at what is this interaction? How can data interact with the economy? What do we actually mean by this? So we have to start, first we'll have to start from the assumption that crypto changes ownership models. Specifically, we have these things called protocols, which broadly you can see as companies. But instead of having a company model where you have centralized ownership, a small number of owners, and lots of participants and services or something performed, the whole point of having a protocol is we do something where everyone is incentivized to participate, and therefore the scale tends to be bigger. This obviously means that the collective have to work to the benefit of the whole, and if a minority cannot on its own make a protocol succeed. So this is a big change. In general, this sounds quite generally esoteric, so we're going to kind of unpack it a bit. But we also have to understand Web3 to understand all of this, because all of this we're talking about is within a Web3 context. So specifically with Web3, what we mean is broadly an internet built on crypto principles. So we're dealing within the internet here, which is obviously the first kind of start at overall connectedness in the world. And these principles are broadly four. One is, as I say, companies replaced by protocols. Two is the interaction with the web through a wallet identity. So what this means is that I have a wallet with that is capable of owning assets such as money or anything. Money is kind of also data, by the way, but we won't get too far into that. And I interact, my account, my single sign-on is this wallet that can own stuff rather than a Facebook account or a Google account. And it's kind of obvious why this would need to be the case. Web3 also has inbuilt incentives because everything is a protocol, as I mentioned earlier. We want to design incentive structures that make the community act towards the whole, that you have act towards the benefit of the commons rather to any one particular person's ends, or rather acting in one's ends aligns perfectly, or acting to one's own end aligns perfectly with the end of the community. And the last one kind of broadly is fiat replaced by digital money. And the reason this is important is not, without getting into anything financial, the reason this is important is that money in crypto is programmable. So it's inbuilt into protocols. It is a native currency of protocols, and you can build actual money, things like stable coins, on top of protocols. So in order for me to have an experience where incentives are really inbuilt into the web and into my user experience, and I have my identity as a wallet, I also need money itself to be programmable so that it can move as a product of things that I do on the internet automatically. So this is kind of Web3. So these are the principles. I'm not saying any of them is necessarily true at this time. I'm just going to state what people generally mean by Web3. And one of the main things here is self-sovereignty. And what this means is that the individual has basically complete control of their interaction with Web3. So they control and custodize their own money. They control all of their data. I can restrict my people's access to stuff I own immediately through one single way. No one can stop me participating in a system. It's all to do with self-sovereignty. And this is very important. And if self-sovereignty is to be true and to be a feature of Web3, then naturally I can immediately have a different way of looking at my data. But this kind of has problems. And one such problem is that if you charge, so I'm assuming everyone here knows how MetaMask works, but let's just spend 30 seconds explaining how MetaMask works. So MetaMask is a wallet. It's actually this little fox there. I don't think it will display, but I probably shouldn't dox myself. But it's a little fox, and it's a wallet, and it has money. It has cryptocurrencies. It has tokens, or a token can be anything. It doesn't have to be money, but it has tokens. And the issue is, I know my password to MetaMask. And my MetaMask is backed up with a ledger, and to move money I have to click buttons on my ledger. My private keys are very safe and kind of securely kept. But broadly, if I were to lose access to any of that stuff, or all of that stuff, I would permanently lose access to my account. And this immediately makes it quite hard to interact with crypto, because that's a steep learning curve, and the cost to people losing their private keys and access is extremely high. Although I say that, I've never met anyone in crypto who's ever actually lost access to their wallet. So, but hacking is a massive thing. So immediately, like if we're going to construct this future around Web3, like custody is already like a massive problem. And things like moving from crypto to fiat are a massive problem, and doing it quick, cheaply, and sustainably is, well, staying not being that important, but doing it quick and easily is a problem. So it's not obvious that Web3 can get off the ground, or it can get off the ground, but can go to scale with these issues. But if we do take this as true, that you have a wallet and I use it as my account to interact with protocols, we can end up with some sense of digital identity. Now, this isn't perfect digital identity because it doesn't say anything about my human self. It's just a wallet that I use, and that over time, if I continue to use that same wallet, has a track record and a history attached to me, and a kind of a personality attached to it. But broadly, it's just still a wallet. But we do have this digital thing that if I represent myself as that wallet, that is me. Like I now have a digital way of interacting with the world that is non-fungible, completely unique to me. And this can replace SSO. So without going too far into like how, I mean, we actually can do it briefly. Like if I go to, let's take Aave. If I'm going to use Aave, it's immediately, like I don't log into a Google account or a centralized account that someone can have access to. I immediately log in with, let me do it. Yeah, this is my wallet. Like I would disconnect. And actually, no, it's connected. But it's immediately going to ask me for my wallet. I can have different wallets and different kind of types of accounts. But broadly, this is replacing SSO, single sign-on. This is like the Google account we use to sign into everything, the Facebook account. Think how much data Facebook, Google, Microsoft, whatever it has, had about you and your interactions with the world because you used that account to do all that stuff. Like this was a huge issue, and there's no way of recovering that data or knowing anything on what you're kind of doing. So this identity immediately replaces SSO, and that is potentially really cool. And further, if companies are replaced by protocols, and we'll unpack that in a second, I now have a natural way to interact with them with a crypto identity because they're built on the same rails, with the same Lego box as crypto, as my kind of wallet is. And to kind of go a kind of step further, if let's look at what it actually means for a company to replace by a protocol, and it's broadly this. Like, let's take Aave again. Instead of having a centralized company that provides lending and does it for me, I'm effectively trading peer-to-peer, or lending peer-to-peer with other people, where the technology is just a middleman, but one that like doesn't have any personality to it. It can't. It can't itself. Once written a smart contract, change itself. It is written, like the code is law, it completely stays. This whole experience is one where it's built in a way that's open and transparent and permissionless, and anyone can fork it and upgrade it. And we could definitely see a world where you have the Facebooks replaced by decentralized social networks, and minimally, without talking about all the complex crypto things that you could do, like just having a Facebook equivalent built, but it was owned by everyone and it had governance that built in that allowed people to kind of dictate where they want the direction of the project to go. Could happen. I'm not saying it's that plausible. There's clearly kind of various ideological reasons not to do that, but that is the minimal version. The kind of the most likely or the most attractive version is some decentralized social network that also nails incentive design, and it has things like it by design incentivizes influencers, and gives people different access related to how they engage with the social network. Maybe in terms, rather than having like a central party policing or setting the guidelines on what's allowed and what's not allowed, that itself could be decided by a community in real time, and constantly changed and updated in real time. And some sense of democracy built in, because if anyone remembers, with all of complex election stuff, like the Russians potentially rigging things like the US election, that sort of stuff, one could potentially have solved if you had changed the way Facebook did its ads. Things like adding ads on top of a social network. Maybe like I, as a user who've engaged with Facebook for many years, might still want to keep the functionality of Facebook, but do not want ads to be. Like, this is something that could have gone to the community. This is something that could have been decided collectively, or if someone didn't like it, because everything's open source, forked it and said, no, we're going to now do a Facebook that doesn't have ads because we believe this has better intrinsic value. There's the whole, when you build stuff on crypto principles, this is, you get different outcomes and you get different ways of building a company that I'm not suggesting are optimal in either way, but just different. Well, the one thing they have is, if you build something on something like Ethereum or like whatever, like I have this account that I use to engage with every application, and it makes therefore building stuff and kind of piecing stuff together and interacting with stuff incredibly easy. And this is the point, crucially, like all this is made possible because everything is built on the same Legos, i.e. something like Ethereum, and everything is code based, so it can happen automatically. So let's just park there. As such, we can imagine a world where I can tangibly own my data because everything is on the same playing field. I have one account to get into everything, and I have a digital identity. I can start protocols can be built that make people's data sovereign, such that I could do things like, if I want to leave a social network, that social network doesn't have any of my data anymore because I can permission my data through my wallet, for instance. That's one thing that could like 100% happen. I could everything is transparent in a kind of protocol, so I could see if any of my data is retained, and protocols therefore would probably be exist where you have an exit button. If anyone's actually used a DAO, for instance, like there's an exit button, you can just leave. There is some data still left over of what your previous interactions were, but broadly, like your whole engagement with that DAO can end in a second, and by your voluntarily, because you want it to. And actually, you can't really do that so easily in anything in life. But specifically, like the obvious use case everyone talks about is like, Google has all my data. I don't know what Google has. There's no way of knowing. Well, with a protocol, you know what is stored and where. You can see everything being stored or potentially being stored on IPFS. And you can therefore perhaps build protocols where you can give people control over who has what data and restrict access to that data as well. There's a tacit assumption here that this is how crypto is going to turn out, and it's quite obvious that crypto could turn out to be something else. Like, we're kind of assuming here that like protocols really do emerge, and they emerge in this certain way. And really, it's important to say that in crypto, no protocol really has significant use cases. I'm going to use the word significant here because there are obviously stuff that has use cases beyond things linked to financial use cases, and particularly no one is really actually like monetizing the data or changing access to that data, apart from through things like lending, like NFTs. Maybe that's the closest you get to like, if my ownership of NFTs and my interaction with NFTs is kind of data related, and I can lend my NFTs out and lend my if anyone's played Axie Infinity, for instance, like this is such a nice example. You get things like scholars, where people can own an Axie, and they lend it out to other people to use on their behalf to engage with the game. So they effectively lent their piece of data, which is, or this kind of piece of ownership, which is access and involvement in the game, and they're giving it to someone else temporarily, and they can take that back at any time and take control. So all of this is so general still, and crypto, like protocols might not emerge, and protocols might look just very different, and Web3 might look very different. Maybe people decide MetaMask is the worst experience in the world, everything stays fiat based. We kind of are making a ton of assumptions here, and I'm very aware of that. We're just trying to paint a picture of what it could look like, and furthermore, it might be a world in which like data actually doesn't matter. Like it's like, well, this data we thought was kind of valuable because it kind of really value an aggregate isn't that value on an individual level, and like no one really cares about like who I am. And there's the other aspect of crypto, which is mostly people are anonymous. So like, what data are we actually collecting about me and my digital identity? Like what I've bought, like maybe what websites I've gone to. Like it's not obvious that this data is like actually that valuable unless used for malicious purposes. So this should be just kind of remembered. But assuming the internet is rebuilt as decentralized protocols, there is this world where I have a totally different relationship with my data. And this is kind of important. And the individual, therefore, is part of the building blocks of building good protocols, and that I have to be taken account. And the fact that I own my data and can withdraw from something properly at any time has to be kind of built into the global economy by design. And again, it's self-sovereignty. And in this world, owning my data is crucial to the working of the whole system. If I do not consent to be part of the system and for you to use my data, this system doesn't work. And that's not really the case right now. Like people can contact you, anyone can contact you pretty much any time. We have these public profiles. Yeah, I mean, without getting into it too much, but currently, in this kind of world, like owning my data is crucial to the working of the system, and me having additional identity and necessity to have additional identity and being able to own stuff on the internet is part of the whole system. Like in this world, if you don't have a MetaMask account, you don't access it. Like this is kind of huge. Like it's set like right now, like I can go in and be very lazy with the way I use my data, sign up to loads of stuff, give everyone access to my email, do stuff, not worry like what happens. But like in this future system, you're kind of forcing people to self-custodize, be responsible for themselves by design. And like that's a very different system. And maybe some could say better. It raises ideological questions about paternalism as well. So yeah, it raises questions about whether we should want people to have this ability to do it and expect people. And again, this goes into questions that are far beyond this lecture about the data economy. The other thing here is that obviously I can exit any time, and that my consent has to be built in the system working. Whereas now we have this kind of tacit consent, and you can broadly say things have gone wrong with this tacit consent. Like our data has been abused, and it's always hard to see specific cases where our kind of we feel taken advantage of because of our interaction with data, or the way we kind of big companies handle our data. But it's very clear in aggregate that our data is being used to kind of change the way we think. Like if anyone's ever listened to Spotify, like that you feel like sometimes you're in an echo chamber where you only ever listen to the same music because the algorithms are trained on what people like us but not us like to listen to, and that can very much subtend to everyone listening into the same stuff because everyone's kind of working on the same algorithms. It's being kind of music is cultivated by the same algorithms. In this crypto world, like my identity is so synonymous with my data, and my consent is so synonymous with my interaction with systems. This is just a completely different way of thinking about stuff, and maybe not an efficient way to build an economy. And like if you're building businesses, you have to build it therefore with the user really being first, and respect for people's data really being first, because otherwise they won't give it to you and they won't interact with you. And there's no big red button at the start of using Google which says, by the way, like you're going to give us a ton of data and we're not really going to give it back. Whereas like in crypto, you kind of are doing that because you get a big, and this is actually a specific thing we haven't talked about, approving use of something related to your wallet is a literal bit thing you have to agree to, and is you have to sign a transaction. And so that is not tacit, that's explicit. And obviously when I use Facebook, like it's very much tacit. Like they give me an account, I start using it, I start doing stuff. If I want to learn anything about my data, I have to crawl into the back of settings. In crypto, it's very much in your face what you are consenting to. And as I said earlier, like we don't realize it, but we have emissions of data everywhere because we just go around the internet with these accounts that we don't control, and data is just everywhere and we don't know where it is, and it's like we are just emitters of data without even knowing it. Whereas one could perhaps, if everything is through one account, a crypto account, which is something I fundamentally control, even if I emit it, I know where I've been, it's all in one place, and I could easily recover it or understand where an abuse of data possibly happened. Right now, like we've all seen those things of having passwords, and you find out like so your common password has been exposed and is now being used to hack into your bank account. And yeah, that's all because some account somewhere had a vulnerability or some website you don't even know about. If I'm doing everything through a crypto, effectively single sign-on, I have probably more of a chance of knowing everything that is engaged with that. Again, because it's built on the same Rails and Lego blocks. There's a big problem that stops all of this vision, which broadly is KYC, AML, and regulation. So the kind of reason why this is a problem is anything with money built in is subject to perhaps possible abuse and money laundering. And so we do tend to have basic things like KYC, which is know your clients and like know who you're kind of engaging with, and AML and like regulation come in that make this otherwise what is now kind of a smooth system on loose in crypto world with no real regulation, like when I'm actually using crypto, to something where there's clunkiness built in because you have to abide by regulatory red tape. And that's why protocols might not end up as protocols, because you need more traditional forms of company building. Perhaps, I'm not saying this will happen, but it's crypto as money and digital money, it might be seen as so powerful that it needs to be highly regulated, and that instead of having crypto stablecoins, you might end up having things like central bank digital currencies, which of course like are great, but like they're great, but they are going to be permissioned, and that might be okay and that might not be okay. And why do we have regulation? It is to be because ultimately not everyone can take care of themselves, and it's to stop bad actors who, I mean, this is the tragedy of a common situation. Like crypto hasn't found a way really to govern itself en masse because it's a hard problem to solve. And in society, we have governments to do that, and governments interpret their roles in many ways. And one is to regulate just to stop bad things happening. That does change the experience you have with Web3 if you have regulation at every bit and it's permissioned rather than being permissionless, because then you stop having things as open and decentralized and they become centralized, and that which means ownership is also centralized. And then I don't feel like I can, and we haven't mentioned this at all, I don't feel like I can therefore trust these entities. The whole point of crypto is trustless. The only thing I trust is the code, which I can read and I can verify. That kind of one of the key things. But regulation bring in trust issues, because regulation rather forces one to confront issues of trust, because we are trusting government to look after us at the end of the day. This all as well, the other thing is with this whole Web3 vision is it puts a lot of pressure on incentive design. What I mean is this: most crypto systems were built with a certain system that seems like in game theoretical terms it could work, but unfortunately as things got very, very valued, the simple acts became incredibly valuable, and therefore people perhaps stopped engaging with crypto systems, crypto networks, crypto protocols for the benefit of what use case they had, and more just to make money. And this just messed things up a little bit. And so then the best laid protocol might end up becoming a money-making device primarily, and not for its other purpose, like being a social network, or like providing this niche financial use case, or like being a place for like to play a game with NFTs. And so this whole kind of Web3 data economy vision just puts a lot of pressure on incentive design. So can we imagine a more likely world here? And this is broadly a permissioned data world, or sorry, a permissioned blockchain world, where you have things like Web3 and you have MetaMask, but like someone regulates who can have access to MetaMask, or like who can use certain coins, and what protocols are allowed to exist, and there are rules about what you can and cannot do. And this is kind of sad because it's not really what crypto wants to do in its innovation ciphering. But realistically, and this all really comes from the fact that anything that acts as money is incredibly difficult. It is incredibly difficult because government's money is an incredibly powerful resource, and governments would like to control that accordingly. And if government loses the ability to run its own economy, or to manage what is being used for exchange, then it loses power. And again, there's reasons to want or not want this, but a more likely world is some permissionedness. That is the word I'm going to go for about this whole world. And then we get to this other thing, which is the second half of what we talked about, which is maybe what is more likely is we have not a global economy built on data, but within the sphere of data, some economy. Some economic design and incentives built around data, rather than data being this huge thing that I can control all my access to, and kind of, And broadly, this is some world where, as we talked about, where Web3 is merged into the current system safeguards. There's regulation, we probably use fiat, there's government oversight, it's kind of permissioned Web3. We can take a track. And within this, there's a regulated economy about how I use my data and how my data can be used. Maybe there are systems that are built that allow me to kind of withdraw access to my data, and there are systems where I can kind of in one place easily kind of withdraw from different sites and bits of the internet that I don't want to. But what I don't have is self-sovereignty. I don't have complete control. People can stop me getting involved, and therefore can stop bad actors getting involved as well. And there is a safeguard if I lose access. Because again, also, if you give people complete control of the data, this point we didn't make earlier, like they might not know how to responsibly handle their data. So like you can go from like people not having control, which is what is the case now, to people having complete control. But giving people complete control is often a bad idea. Like one example is letting people like dial out their pensions when they are young is probably a bad idea, because the whole point of having a pension is as a safeguard and to force people to put money away so that they can look after themselves when they're older. Like this, you could have the same with data. Like you don't necessarily want people to give complete control, because maybe what people then do is start selling their data immediately, and there might be bad idea. This might be a bad idea. So the most likely world is where we put some economic and crypto principles into data without giving people complete control of that data. And this feels like the most likely to me, especially as governments embrace and financial systems embrace crypto. That's like permissioned Web3 sounds dirty, but what it actually is at the end of the day is just like restricting bad actors getting involved. And again, one might have strong ideological reasons against all of this. And in this world, I do still have a digital identity, and I do own my data. There are just a limit to it. And maybe this is a good thing, maybe this is a bad thing. But I could still, even within this world, imagine the ability to control access and sell access. There'll just be limits to what I can do. And like what we're actually looking for here, and what the dream would be, is still have that opt-out button that I could still engage with stuff through digital identity and restrict access to my data at some level, even if it's not all my data, and even maybe I don't have the ability to sell it. I just have the ability to control access to it. And in all of this, like new companies and experiences are going to emerge. So this is cool. This is exciting. This is incredibly different. And like if giving people at least some more control over their data, and building, by the way, like we haven't really talked about it, forget people, like we want to build applications that have a rich interaction with our data. And we are probably happy to give protocols more access to our data if we could build better experiences. The obvious thing here, which is the elephant in the room, is the metaverse, where like in a metaverse, everything is our data, is like data. Like I have a digital identity, like everything is then measurable. It's like it's in an environment purely built on code. This is going to be a completely different experience. So like, again, different models of data will emerge and different models engaging and using my data and getting involved will emerge. And I expect the unexpected. In this world, accessing blockchain data is just going to be super duper vital. And like we've done this on this talk on a very esoteric level on like what is the data economy, what it means, what could happen, what is unlikely to happen, what are the possible ways this could go wrong. But like clearly there is a lot of data associated with blockchain in a general level, and especially if I use it as digital identity, I do lots of transactions and things are built but using blockchain technology and principles. We go back to what the graph is actually there for, which is if you're going to build decentralized things at any level, completely decentralized or a little bit, it is a spectrum. I need some way of getting access to it. And the graph, this is all the graph does. It gives me access to this data in aggregate on a big scale in a decentralized manner, and allows me to put that data into things, other applications I want to build, which is where the graph comes in. Right, that brings me broadly to the end of what I wanted to say this evening. Nice, short and sharp. If there are any questions, which I ask you to write on chat, I ask you to write them now. Otherwise, I will point you to the kind of next event that we are doing, which is going to take place on Tuesday evening, which is Tuesday the 9th of November. And we're going to get technical again. And this is going to be about subgraphs. So we're actually going to start playing around with the very thing you use to interact and use the graph. Like we'll create our own subgraphs, we'll do all that jazz. So we look forward to hosting you on that. Cool. Are there any other questions from anyone? Awesome. Well, thank you very much for joining us this evening, guys. I'll see you on Tuesday. This will go up on YouTube and Medium in the morning. And in the meantime, I do have a good evening. That's a good question. Is there any other protocol like the graph? So I mentioned one before. Covalent is, let me get it up. Yeah, Covalent is a graph competitor and more kind of around the pure API route of it. Yeah, I think there are some examples on other chains. There's one on Solana, but forgive me, I can't remember at the moment. Cool. Any other questions? Yeah, go for it. Yes, by miles. Everyone uses it. So that's one of the things. It's actually funny doing events like this, like the graph, because it's so synonymous with being used. So yeah, no, everyone uses the graph, 100%. Cool. Any other questions? Cool. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. We look forward to seeing you on Tuesday. Do make sure you stay close to the YouTube. Well, actually, it'll be sent to you anyway, so not needed. But for now, everyone, thank you very much and have a good evening.